Hi, I've got a brand new story for you. This one is a bit different because the protagonist is the only child, but her parents do something really, really bad and regret it. Let's listen.
When I returned home from a work trip, my 8-year-old was with a foster family. "It's better this way," my mom said casually. Before that, they begged me to go because they needed the money. 9 days later, they regretted everything when I was in a hotel conference room 3 states over when I tried to call Caroline on Wednesday night, and my mother answered instead. She said Caroline was in the bath, said it lightly, then asked how my meetings were going as if that should settle it. I told her I only had 10 minutes before the next session and wanted to hear my daughter's voice. My mother laughed and said, "She's splashing everywhere. Call later." I called again after dinner. This time my father picked up and told me Caroline had gone to sleep early. "She never goes down this early on a school night," I said. He told me not to turn everything into a problem. Then he added, "We've got her." I stood in the hallway outside the ballroom staring at a terrible floral carpet while the line went dead in my hand. On paper, nothing had happened. My daughter was with my parents, the people who had pushed me to take the trip in the first place. But something about the speed of their answers and how completely they kept me away from her voice started needling at me. It was a small thing. It did not feel small. By Thursday morning, I had started timing my breaks around Caroline's schedule the way I always did when I traveled, and every call ended the same way. She was outside. She was playing. She was helping Grandma cook. She was in the shower now. "Call later." I texted, "Tell her I love her. Tell her I'll be home tomorrow." My mother sent back a thumbs up and nothing else. At lunch, I stepped out of a client meeting and called again. My father answered before the second ring, which told me he had been watching the phone. "You need to focus on work," he said. I reminded him they were the ones who had insisted I go because the extra pay would help all of us. He ignored that and said Caroline was doing great. When I asked him to put her on anyway, he said she had gone outside with chalk and bubbles and could not come in right now. I almost told him to walk out and get her, but my manager was waiting for me back inside, and I had no proof, only dread. So I did what people do when something is wrong but not yet provable. I swallowed it, went back into the meeting, and worked through the day on a lie. By Friday afternoon, I had one clean shirt left, sore feet, and a little plush fox in my tote bag that I had bought at the airport because Caroline loved naming stuffed animals before she even hugged them properly. The drive from the airport to my parents' house ran on one bright thought. In a minute, she would hear the door, come charging down the hall, and ask me 6 questions before I got my shoes off. When I let myself in with my key, the house looked normal in the worst possible way. My mother and father were in the kitchen talking about a celebrity divorce. Dinner smelled half-started. A mug of tea sat cold by the sink. My father looked up and said, "You're back," like I had returned from the pharmacy. I dropped my bag by the door and smiled automatically because home had a script and my body still knew it. "Where's Caroline?" I asked. My mother put down the spoon she was using. My father stopped moving. Nothing dramatic happened. Nobody gasped. The air simply changed. And in that one strange, quiet second, I knew I was not about to hear anything ordinary. My mother wiped her hands on a dish towel and said, too carefully, "Okay, we need to talk about that." Every part of me went cold. "What happened?" I asked. She told me to sit down. I didn't move. "Where is she?" My father stepped in with the same infuriating calm. "Hannah, just sit so we can explain this properly." I heard my own voice sharpen. "No, you explain it standing up." My mother said, She's safe. And that one word hit so hard I had to grab the back of a chair. Safe meant something had already gone wrong. Safe meant I was late. I started asking faster. Was she hurt? Sick? At the hospital? Why were they talking like this? My father kept saying, "Nothing like that," without offering the one answer that mattered. When I demanded again to know where my daughter was, my mother glanced at my father first. That look did it. This was not panic. This was a plan. They had already had this conversation with each other. They had already decided what they were going to say to me. By then, my legs were shaking enough that sitting down felt less like obedience and more like staying upright long enough to hear the damage. Once I sat, my mother took the chair across from me, and my father stayed by the counter with his arms folded like some neutral witness. Then my mother said, "We've been thinking for a while that you aren't managing very well." I actually stared at her for a second because the sentence was so absurd next to the fact that my daughter was missing from the house. She kept going anyway. I worked too much. I was stretched too thin. Caroline needed more stability than this. "You begged me to take this trip," I said. My father cut in at once. "That isn't the point." "Then what was the point?" I asked, because my child was clearly not in the next room, and they were speaking like this was a family budget meeting. My mother lifted her chin. "We did what we thought was best." I asked again where Caroline was. My father said, "With a nice family." For a second, my brain refused to put those words in any order that made sense. "What family?" I asked. He repeated it, slower this time, as if I were the problem. "A nice family." My mother leaned back and said, "It's better this way." That was when the floor of my life dropped out from under me. At first, they would not say foster family outright. They kept hiding behind softer words. A placement. A home. People experienced with children. I talked over every one of them. Who authorized this? What did you tell them? Where did you take her? My mother finally lost patience and said they had told the agency that I was away, that I had left Caroline in their care, that there was no clear written return plan, that they could not reliably reach me, and that they were no longer willing to keep her because the situation had become unstable. "I was gone for 4 days," I said. My father shrugged. "You weren't here." That was the moment the whole thing snapped into focus. They had pushed me to take the trip. They had promised they wanted the time with her. Then while I was gone, while I was calling and being told she was in the bath or asleep or busy, they had taken my daughter to child welfare and painted some version of me as absent enough to lose her. "You told them I abandoned her?" I asked. Neither of them answered directly, which told me everything. My mother only said, "She's being looked after." I stood so fast the chair scraped across the floor. Whatever excuses came next were useless. I did not need their motives. I needed a name, an address, and a way to get to my child. I demanded the agency information, and my father tried one last time to control the pace. "You are not going to storm in there and make this worse." I grabbed my bag and said, "You already did that." My mother followed me into the hall talking about procedures now, about how I needed to calm down and be sensible. I turned around and told her I would call every child welfare office in the county until I found Caroline. That ended the performance. My father gave me the agency name. My mother gave me the caseworker's name, Dana, and added, "They won't let you just take her." I looked at my mother then and understood something with awful clarity. She had expected the hardest part to be over by the time I came home. She had expected me to cry, argue, maybe collapse. She had not expected me to move. I got the address, walked out before they could stack more careful words on top of what they had done, and locked myself in my car. My hands shook so badly I missed the ignition twice. Then I got the key in, took one short breath, and drove straight to the agency. On the drive there, my mind kept pulling up old memories as if it had been waiting years for me to finally read them correctly. I was an only child, and with my parents, warmth had always come in bursts strong enough to make you doubt your own history. My mother would suddenly decide we were all getting ice cream in the rain, and for that hour she was funny, easy, delighted by me. My father would kneel on the carpet and help me with a puzzle like he had nowhere else to be. In those moments, I felt chosen. Then the weather changed. A bedroom door would close. Their voices would go quiet behind it. I would stand in the hallway with a drawing or a question and understand, without anyone saying so, that I was in the way now. No one teaches a child that attention can disappear. The house teaches her. By the time I was old enough to name inconsistency, I had already learned to adapt to it. Sitting behind that wheel, heading to the agency where my daughter was because of them, I realized I had spent half my life translating cruelty into mood. This time I wasn't going to translate anything for them. That was the rhythm of my childhood, and because it was the only rhythm I knew, I got very good at managing myself around their moods. One week they would ask about school, promise to come to something, act proud in front of other people. The next week they would forget, get tired, or drift into plans of their own and act surprised that I felt dropped. By middle school, I could read the set of my father's jaw before I asked for anything. I could hear from my mother's footsteps whether she was in one of her bright phases or whether I should make myself smaller for the night. That kind of training follows you into adulthood. It teaches you to treat brief kindness like evidence and to call instability normal because admitting otherwise would require rebuilding the whole map. So when they later sounded attentive and generous and deeply invested in Caroline, some old part of me wanted to believe I was finally getting the family I had always been told existed. The problem with intermittent affection is that it makes people work harder, not walk away. I could see that clearly now, and I hated how late the clarity had come. By the time Caroline was 3, I was already doing most things alone. Adam, my ex and her father, had left for what he called a better life with another woman in another state, and for a while he treated fatherhood like a subscription he could pause without canceling. He called at first. He sent voice messages. He promised weekends, then holidays, then soon. A missed visit became an apology. A missed birthday became flowers with the wrong cartoon character on the card. Then the gaps got longer, and the explanations got thinner. Caroline used to stand by the window when any car door slammed outside. After a while, she stopped doing even that. The worst part was how quietly she adjusted. One day I realized she had not asked about him in weeks, and that was somehow harder than all the earlier crying. Children edit their own expectations faster than adults do. They do it to survive. That history mattered because what happened later was never landing on a blank slate. Caroline had already been left once by the man who was supposed to stay. When my parents tore through the little trust she still had in family, they were not creating a first wound. They were digging into one that had never fully closed. Then my parents entered one of their good phases and played it so convincingly I let them back into the middle of our lives. They were attentive again, generous again, saying exactly the things I had wanted to hear for years. My mother said I should not be carrying everything alone. My father said they wanted to help for once instead of just watching me struggle. They suggested Caroline and I move back in for a while so I could save money, work steadier hours, and have childcare I could trust. I knew who they were. I knew they could turn without warning. But life as a single mother doesn't leave much room for perfect decisions. only workable ones. So I said yes. For a while it even felt easy. Caroline played card games with them on the living room rug, brought them drawings, and fit herself into their orbit the way children do when adults are warm enough to feel safe. My mother bought her little craft kits. My father let her help in the garden and pretended not to notice when she drowned the tomato plants. Watching them together stirred up the oldest hope in me. I told myself age had softened them. I told myself grandparents were different. I told myself safe enough was safe. The warning signs never disappeared. They just wore ordinary clothes. One afternoon I had a work event across town, and my parents insisted there was nothing to worry about, because of course they would pick Caroline up from school. My mother was almost offended that I repeated the time. At 3:28 my phone started buzzing during a presentation. It was the school office. No one had come for Caroline. I still remember the cold that moved through my body when the secretary said my daughter was sitting with her backpack on, trying hard not to cry. I left mid-sentence, drove there with both hands welded to the wheel, and found Caroline in a plastic chair by the window, swinging one sneaker slowly because she was working so hard to look brave. In the car she said, "Grandma forgot, but it's okay," in that careful voice children use when they are already protecting the adults who failed them. That night I confronted my parents. My father said they had lost track of time. My mother said I was making it bigger than it was. That should have ended the arrangement. Instead, I treated it like a warning I could manage. I told myself forgetting was different from harm. I was wrong about that too. So when the work trip came up, my first instinct was no. It was only Monday through Friday and the extra pay would help, but I no longer trusted anyone who had already proven they could forget my child in the shape of an afternoon. I mentioned the trip mostly to explain why I might turn it down. My parents lit up immediately. My mother said they would love the time with Caroline. My father said the money mattered and I would be foolish to pass it up. Then they did the part I can still hear perfectly. They sold it to Caroline right in front of me. Pancakes for dinner. A movie night. Frozen yogurt after school. Caroline's face changed with each promise. Turning the trip down in that moment would not just have disappointed them, it would have crushed her too. So I let myself believe this was one of their good phases again. Monday and Tuesday sounded normal. Wednesday they stopped letting me talk to her. By Wednesday afternoon they had taken her to child welfare and handed her over. They still answered my calls after that. They just answered them themselves. I landed Friday evening with a stuffed fox in my bag and walked into the life they had already detonated. The agency sat in a low beige building beside a strip mall, which felt obscene because places where lives get split open should not be allowed to share a parking lot with a sandwich shop. I parked badly, grabbed my bag, and almost ran inside. The lobby smelled like toner and old coffee. A receptionist behind glass asked whether I had an appointment. I said I needed Dana immediately because my parents had taken my daughter there while I was away for work and placed her with strangers. Saying it aloud made people start moving. The receptionist disappeared through a side door. I stood there with my overnight tote still on my shoulder and Caroline's plush fox pressing against my wallet inside it. When Dana came out, she was younger than I expected, practical looking, badge clipped to a cardigan, already wearing the careful expression of someone stepping into a mess. "I'm Dana," she said. "Come with me." She led me into a small office and motioned toward a chair. I stayed standing. "I'm Hannah," I said. "I landed less than 2 hours ago and came here as soon as I found out what they'd done. I'm Caroline's mother. I'm here, and I need to see my daughter now." Dana's face changed slightly at the word airport. It was the first crack in the story my parents had built. Dana asked me to slow down, but panic does not slow down because someone says please. I kept asking the same questions in different forms. Was Caroline okay? Had she been crying? Did she know I was back? Where was she? Could I go there? Could someone bring her in? Dana answered carefully. Caroline was safe. She was in a licensed foster placement. She had a bed, food, and clothing. That is not what I asked, I said. Then I saw the phrase temporary abandonment concern, after hours emergency intake, clipped to the top page of the file on her desk. That report is false, I told her. My parents pushed me to take a 4-day work trip. I have been calling every day. They would not let me speak to her. Dana asked for dates, return time, whether there had been a written childcare plan. I answered all of it in a rush and shoved my phone across the desk with texts from my mother saying, "We've got her and stop worrying. Enjoy your meetings." Dana did not tell me she believed me, but she stopped treating the folder like the story was settled and started reading it like it might fall apart under scrutiny. I asked again to see my daughter. Dana took a breath, and I knew before she spoke that the answer was still going to hurt. "Not tonight," Dana said. The words were flat enough that they took a second to land. She said she could not authorize immediate removal or contact until intake was reviewed and circumstances were confirmed. I asked what that meant when I was standing right in front of her with ID in my wallet and a return boarding pass in my bag. Dana said she understood I was upset. I told her not to say upset like this was a ruined dinner plan. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "I'll do what I can to arrange a visit." "Not I will. I'll try." I asked whether Caroline had been crying for me. Dana paused, then said only, "She's had a confusing day." That answer was almost worse than the no. I walked out into the cold parking lot and understood there was no version of this night where I went back to my parents' house and slept under their roof. I booked the nearest hotel from my car. My mother called while the confirmation loaded. I watched her name flash across the screen, let it ring out, then blocked both of my parents before I put the phone down. There were explanations I would never need to hear. The only thing left to do was build the record they thought I wouldn't have. The hotel was 5 minutes away. I checked in, locked the door, gave myself 3 minutes to cry, and then sat on the bed and started collecting proof. I pulled up every text about the trip. "Go," my father had written. "We need the money too, and Caroline will love the extra time with us." My mother had sent a cheerful packing list for our fun week. I screenshotted all of it. Then I saved my call history showing every attempt to reach Caroline, every short conversation where one of them had intercepted me, every unanswered callback. I added work emails with the trip dates, my boarding pass, my hotel receipt, and the itinerary showing I had landed less than 2 hours before walking into the agency. Around midnight, my friend Megan called back after seeing my missed call. I told her, "They gave Caroline to foster care." She did not waste a second on disbelief. "Save everything," she said. "Then send it to yourself twice." I sat there in a room that smelled like bleach and bad air freshener, building a timeline while the ice machine rattled down the hall. The night stopped being only panic. It became evidence. I slept in scraps and woke before sunrise with my phone in my hand and a list of lawyers on the hotel notepad. By 7:30, I had messages out to 3 attorneys. Ms. Campbell called back first. She was concise, unsentimental, and exactly what I needed. "Email me the screenshots and a clean timeline," she said. "Do not contact your parents. Document everything." I sent the file to Ms. Campbell from the parking lot, then forwarded the same packet to Dana at the address the agency had given me the night before. 10 minutes later, I walked back into the agency and asked for Dana again. This time, she took me to a conference room instead of intake. My screenshots were already printed on the table. Dana had flagged the intake for first thing review, and her supervisor had already gone through the overnight file. Dana pointed to the texts where my parents urged me to take the trip, the call log showing repeated attempts to reach Caroline, and my flight confirmation showing I had returned exactly when I said I would. None of it fit abandonment. None of it fit refusal to care. She said my evidence substantially changed the picture and that she could authorize a supervised visit that afternoon while they reviewed next steps. I sat down for the first time since the night before. Then I stopped shaking. I got very calm. The visit room had a couch, a plastic bin of toys, and a mural of trees someone had probably meant to make comforting. Dana opened the door and Caroline was already moving before I got inside. She hit me around the waist, hard, both arms locked, face buried in my jacket like she was bracing against weather. I dropped to my knees and held her just as hard. She felt warm and real and wrong in clothes that were not ours. I kept saying, "I'm here. I'm here," because it was the only sentence that mattered. She pulled back long enough to study my face, then climbed into my lap even though she had outgrown that years ago. She asked where I had been. I said, "Work, and I came back as fast as I could." She asked why Grandma and Grandpa had taken her somewhere else. I told her adults had made a bad decision and none of it was because of her. Then she looked past me at the painted trees and asked, in a small voice, "Is there something wrong with me? Because Daddy left, and then you left, and then they left me too." That was the question that ended my panic and turned it into purpose. "No," I told her, "there is something wrong with what they did." The next few days were not dramatic in a movie way. They were calls, forms, meetings, and the steady collapse of the story my parents had tried to build. Ms. Campbell filed responses and told me exactly what not to say. Dana asked for more documents, and I kept producing them. Megan brought coffee, chargers, and the kind of company that does not ask you to perform strength. By Tuesday afternoon, after several more days of calls, forms, and meetings, Caroline was released back to me while the case itself stayed open. When Dana brought her out with a trash bag of spare clothes and school papers, Caroline ran to me again with that same desperate force, but this time I was allowed to walk out holding her hand. In the hotel that night, she would not let me close the bathroom door. She followed me from bed to sink to window like proximity itself could keep me from disappearing again. When I turned off the lamp, she asked, "You'll still be here in the morning, right?" I said yes. 10 minutes later, she asked again. I answered every time. Proof did not fix the damage. Being right did not fix it either. But at least by then we were back on the same side of the locked door, and that was the first real step home. Getting Caroline back settled one thing immediately. We were never going back to my parents' house. Not for a night, not to save money, not for any reason that could be dressed up as practical. Ms. Campbell agreed before I finished the sentence. "Separate address," she said, "as fast as possible." So I spent 2 days doing apartment applications from a hotel desk while Caroline colored beside me and checked every so often that my purse was still in the room, as if bags could guarantee mothers. I found a small 2-bedroom available right away and signed without pretending it was perfect. Then I went to the school and removed my parents from every pickup list, emergency contact field, and authorized access note. The secretary frowned at her screen and said, "Your mother called this morning asking whether Caroline would be back Monday." That told me they were already trying to reach us through the school, and later I realized the forwarding notice that had gone to the old house before I finished changing everything over was probably how they got our new address. I did not raise my voice. I only said, "She is not authorized for any information." After that, Megan drove me to my parents' house so I could collect our things, while she waited in the car with Caroline, who sat with a juice box and her tablet. I packed clothes, medications, school papers, her blanket, and left my key on the counter with one line for them. Contact goes through Ms. Campbell. Nothing else was owed. For the next couple of days after that, my parents stayed silent, and the silence let Caroline and me learn the new apartment in peace. We ate macaroni on the floor because the table had not arrived yet. We made a rule that no door in our home got slammed hard enough to make either of us flinch. Then, 9 days after I came back from the trip, the buzzer rang during Sunday lunch. I looked through the peephole and saw my parents standing there with bakery boxes in their hands, dressed like this was a cheerful family visit. I opened the inner door and left the chain on. My mother smiled too brightly. "We brought Caroline those cinnamon rolls she likes." My father said, "Maybe we could take her to the zoo for a couple hours. Give you a break." For 1 second, I just looked at them, because some kinds of audacity deserve a proper witness. Then I said, "No!" My mother's smile tightened. "Hannah, don't be childish." Behind me, the apartment had gone completely silent, which meant Caroline was listening. That silence made the next part easy. I stepped into the hallway, pulled the door nearly shut behind me, and prepared to say the last polite thing they were ever going to get from me. In the hallway, my parents started minimizing before I had finished closing the door. Looking after a child full-time for a few days had been harder than expected, my mother said. My father said I should never have dumped that responsibility on them. I reminded them that they had asked for it repeatedly in writing, and my mother flinched. Then they began talking over each other, sanding down the truth. It was not as if they had hurt her, my father said. Foster care had only been temporary, my mother added. You are acting like we committed a crime. I let that sit. Then I said evenly, You lied to take my child out of my care. You told strangers I had abandoned her when you had my travel dates, my calls, and my return time. Neither of them had an answer, so they reached for outrage instead. It had nowhere to land. I told them they would never again have unsupervised access to Caroline, never again be on a pickup list, and never again be considered safe caregivers. You made a choice, I said. These are the consequences. The cease and desist went out that Monday, along with notices to the school, aftercare, pediatric office, and apartment manager. From then on, their version of events had no place left to hide. The case closed slowly, but it closed in our favor because the proof never changed. The texts were still there. The call logs were still there. Dana's notes reflected the revised timeline, and Ms. Campbell made sure every agency and school record matched reality instead of my parents' story. Much later, once Caroline was back in a steadier place and I could think without shaking, I gave a formal statement and agreed to cooperate with the case over the false statements they had made about me abandoning her. They ended up with criminal records, which shocked exactly 2 people. By then, Caroline was healing in the ordinary, uneven way children heal. More clingy than before, more sensitive, still checking rooms at bedtime, still wanting me to answer twice when she asked whether I'd be there in the morning. But she laughed more in our apartment than she ever had in my parents' house. Maybe that was because nothing in our home changed without warning. No closed doors meant to shut someone out. No moods that ruled the weather. Just dinner, homework, bath, story, bed. Quiet can feel extravagant when chaos used to call itself family. I cut my parents off completely, and I have never regretted protecting her. Tell me honestly, would you have let them back in? Did I do the right thing by cutting them off completely, Or should I have still allowed some contact? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more.
Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed the story. Let me know what you thought in the comments. I also started narrating my own stories on a different channel, so feel free to check it out. There should be a link somewhere on the screen or in the description.